one of the nice things about the infinite game is two players or more who sell basically the same product for basically the same price for basically the same quality can all be wildly successful at the same time. Like no one wins. And remember, we're deciding the metrics. So we could decide that it's market share or revenue or profit, and we're making these arbitrary comparisons to arbitrary other players, and we can be all high and mighty about ourselves. You know, General Motors decided that that market share was the thing, and they were obsessed with being number one in market share. Meanwhile, they were losing money hand over fist year after year after year. Not sure if that's a very infinite-minded focus, because you're clearly going to put yourself out of the game. Remember, when Circuit City went bankrupt, Best Buy didn't win anything. If anything, they had to change the way that they played because Amazon became a much more dominant force in the industry, and so they couldn't actually do the things that they used to do. And this is what it means to be an infinite player. It means you understand that it's not simply about repeating the same thing that's always worked, but it's adapting with politics and culture and technology. And it's not actually about competing against another player in the field, but the only true competitor in an infinite game is actually yourself. How do I make my product better this year than it was last year? How do I give better advice this year than I gave last year? How do I become a better leader this year than I was last year? And it's a constant education of constant improvement. I can tell you a funny story, which you'll recognize from the book, which really captures the difference between a finite and infinite mindset, and it comes from a personal experience. I had the opportunity to speak at an education summit for Microsoft. And then a few months later, I was asked to speak at an education summit for Apple. Now, this was back in the Steve Ballmer days when Steve Ballmer ran Microsoft. And at the Microsoft summit, the vast majority of the executives spent the vast majority of their presentations talking about how to beat Apple. Ballmer at the time was obsessed with beating Apple. At the Apple summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with their mission, the other one was obsessed with beating their competition. Guess which one was struggling with issues of trust, cooperation, and innovation? So at the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the new Zune when it was a thing. This was Microsoft's response to the iPod. And again, there's plenty of evidence and footage of Ballmer talking about he was going to beat the iPod and this was going to be the best product ever. And I have to say, this little piece of technology was quite good. It was very user-friendly. It worked very well. And it was a really nice little product. At the end of my Apple talk, I was sharing a taxi with a senior Apple executive, and I couldn't help myself. I just had to stir the pot. So I turned to him and I said, you know, Microsoft gave me their new Zune, and it is so much better than your iPod Touch. And he turned to me and he said, I have no doubt. And the conversation was over. Because an infinite player understands sometimes you have the better product, sometimes they have the better product. Sometimes you're ahead and sometimes you're behind. The goal is not to beat your competitor. The goal is to outdo yourself. Where Microsoft was obsessed with beating Apple, Apple ignored Microsoft and was obsessed with outdoing itself. A year later, Apple introduced the iPhone, which rendered both the iPod and the Zune completely obsolete.